This donut contains 17,731 smaller donuts made by individual artists in one of the largest art collaborations of history, and in 3 days it's being auctioned off to raise money for Blender. After millions of people made their own donuts after following my tutorial, I asked everyone to send them to me for this weird project, which is how 19,000 blend files arrived on my hard drive. Opening and rendering these files by hand would have been torture, so I reached out to an engineer I trust who wrote a custom Blender add-on just for rendering donuts. It read the folder of the Blender files, then used rules to predict what the donut was, place it in front of the camera, render it, and move to the next file. Which is great, in theory, except that the files that you people sent us had every 3D problem you can imagine. Missing textures, wacky displacement, duplicate meshes, intersecting meshes, invisible meshes, and some files just straight up crashed. So further logic was applied to try to detect and fix these issues, but if it encountered something strange that it couldn't, then it flagged the donut for manual review. And because people sent donuts that were made in alpha versions of Blender that crashed, a system was designed to auto-restart Blender, try again, and then if it failed 3 times in a row, flag it for review. If you want to try the add-on yourself, the engineer actually made it open source, which if you know what you're doing, can be used to batch render infinite amounts of objects across multiple blend files. I'm sure it's handy to someone, so the link is in the description. After many revisions and thousands of lines of code, the add-on was able to correctly render about 95% of the donuts. But that unfortunately still left about 900 that needed manual fixes. And after a few repetitive hours of doing this myself, I decided to bring in some muscle. So I reached out to my assistant Bill, who spent weeks manually correcting all the broken donuts until they were rendered correctly. So of the 19,182 donut submissions we received, about 1,000 had problems that we couldn't solve, and about 300 had to be discarded as duplicates. But we then arrived at a healthy total of 17,731 donuts. I thought the hard part was over at this point, but turns out that making a mosaic from these images is an entirely new challenge. There's actually not a huge market for mosaics, so most mosaic software is aimed at small jobs like wedding collages or scrapbooking. And most of the mosaics were barely mosaics, they were just darkening or brightening images, which in my opinion is just an overlay, and I didn't want to do that. But I eventually found a small piece of software called Mosaic Creator, which is not pretty or easy to understand, but it is the most flexible software by far, letting you customize just about anything you want. To make it an honest project, I set myself the goal of never changing the color of the donut, not reusing a donut twice except to fill a gap, and no cheating, like discarding hard to use colors on the border. This meant that I had to change my Mega Donut source image into something that matched the exact palette of colors and shades of colors that appeared in the images we rendered. Because if a color or a shade couldn't be found, then it had to be forced into the image as noise. And if there's too much noise, it becomes unreadable. So for example, if there's lots of green noise, I had to add more green sprinkles. If there's lots of chocolate noise, then I had to move the lights away to create more shadow. It was a painstakingly slow feedback loop by rendering, importing, waiting 10 to 30 minutes to see the results, rotate a sprinkle and try again. But I eventually found the sweet spot with the least amount of noise and the most pleasing result. The final mosaic can be explored in full screen by clicking the link in the description. It's a gigantic 21K image made up of thousands of donuts created by people learning Blender. There's also a donut database, so you can see all the individual donuts, their name, and even search for a specific country. In 3 days, the mosaic is going to be sold at auction, along with 30 of my personal favorite donuts that appeared in the mosaic. And all of these proceeds are going to Blender to help future generations discover their passion for art as it did for me. So if you know anyone in the NFT space that might be interested, please send them this video to help generate buzz for the launch. It's an opportunity to obtain a piece of history while doing something great for the future of art.